Greetings all, BWS2K here. It is now September 13th when I'm recording this. August was a blur, it flew by. I'm not going to get stuck in the past, but I had a lot of hitches, to use the Cortex terminology, which are mostly gone at this point. I did have a comment, and I mentioned kind of in the last video, in sort of the update, that I had some things I wanted to do, and one of them was to address some of the comments that some of you all have made. So if I can get the text up here. User Greg Moss said under the Froggy video, it would be great to see a video of your process of picking a scenario from Marvel superheroes for this new hero run, Froggy, and doing the GM prep / conversion of it into your Cortex Prime / Marvel Heroic role-playing hybrid. So what I've done is I've taken one of the scenarios from Marvel superheroes, and I'm going to walk through it specifically with Marvel Heroic role-playing in mind. So this is not a Cortex Prime thing. And then afterwards we'll discuss how I would have, or maybe during even, we'll discuss how I would make it into a Cortex Prime scenario. So like, for instance, Crisis Pools, right? That's not in Marvel Heroic, but it is in Cortex Prime, time tests, things like that. So my camera's been wonky. I'm in the new space. My microphone's different. My lighting is different. Hopefully we can get through this without a problem. I'm going to switch to the next image, or the next slide. And this is, I've just basically edited the pages from the PDF so that they're all in one place. I know it's a little bit cut off over here with my bottom logo, but there's nothing really to miss there. So I'm going to try to read through it, and hopefully my camera doesn't junk out on me like it has done already today. And I'm just going to read through that, and then we'll go to another screen and we'll talk a little bit. So, Encounter 5, the Owl Strikes. The summary is that the hero must thwart a bank robbery by the DV's owl. The setup is that the hero is in the vicinity of the Quiche Mall near the Minute Bank and may be in secret identity. That's a thing in Marvel superheroes, secret identities and locations even. A band of 7 criminals, thugs, enter through the door to the mall. The thugs are commanded by the owl. So here's the text for the adventure. It says, the owl has a thin young man in tow, computer expert Ken Michaels. While Owl's thugs are robbing this Minute Bank, the owl forces Michaels to break into the computer and electronically rob all the other banks on the system. So he's hacking into it, right? The owl kidnapped Ken's girlfriend in order to force his compliance. During the first round, and again, Marvel superhero language here, but we're just reading through it. During the first round, the thugs, who are dressed alike in faceless full-body costumes, hold 15 customers, employees, and guards at gunpoint. In the second round, the owl and Michaels commandeer a computer terminal by the window and begin work. It will take Michaels 5 rounds to break into the system and another 3 rounds to transfer the money into the owl's dummy accounts. Within 10 rounds of the transaction's completion, the owl's associates at other locations will close out the bogus accounts and leave with the money. If the hero interferes, but is more than one area away, they use like location called areas, the owl orders his thugs to open fire. If the hero is closer, the thugs gang up on the hero in a slugfest. So in other words, they'll shoot at them if they're further away, but if they're up close, they'll just beat on them. The owl will not leave until the transaction is completed, but if threatened after this, leaves Michaels and his thugs behind and tries to escape by any means possible. As soon as Michaels is released, he tells the hero that his girlfriend is being held hostage by the owl in an apartment next to a grocery on Cleveland. Michaels tells the hero the owl's plans, and if he has 3 rounds left before the owl's associates remove the money, Michaels can stop the transactions, or he could crash the system in 1 round, causing massive delays and damage to the banking system. And then the aftermath of this encounter says Ken Michaels' girlfriend, Peggy, is being held prisoner in a second-floor apartment next to Guido's grocery, guarded by 2 more thugs. She was to be released that evening unharmed, but if the owl is thwarted in his plans, he will go to the apartment and order her killed. And then they have the karma rewards, which are basically in that system. For doing good things, you get karma, which you can use kind of like plot points. It's part of the meta currency there. And if you do villainous things or you fail in winning the crowd or succeeding at the task or whatever, then you get negative karma. So the examples here are preventing the armed robbers from stealing cash that's an award of 25 karma. Each bank robber captured is 10 karma. Each person injured due to the robbery, due to the hero's negligence, is minus 20, right? So it kind of goes back and forth. And then, so that's the encounter. And now we will go to the owl, his sort of write-up in that book. This is in the New York supplement. So they have all the stats listed, and then there's really only 2 powers, which is gliding. I'm not going to read everything, but gliding, and they say that he's a psionic mutant who's able to kind of glide for considerable distance, and then that he wears retractable claws and like talons, right? It also says that he's very wealthy, and he usually equips his gangs with like state-of-the-art tech and heavy weaponry. And then also it just points out that he has like an exoskeleton that he uses for his legs because he's partially paralyzed. And then it lists a little bit about his modus operandi, which is basically just he is a, it says Owl, Leland Owlsley, and it says professional criminal and criminal mastermind, and that's his deal. He doesn't typically get his hands dirty alone. He works with thugs. All right? So let me close that. And we will come over back to this screen. So that's kind of the pitch. That's what's in Marvel Super Heroic, or Marvel Superheroes. And that could take, an evening to play. It could take a session, depending on how you want to set it up. So the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to show you my notes, and we're going to think specifically about Marvel Heroic. So let's flip to this screen. So the things that I wrote down as being important were Kishmal and Minute Bank in terms of locations, because I'm going to be thinking about scene distinctions. There's 7 thugs that are there with the owl, as well as the owl, who is escorting Ken Michaels, who is a hacker. And then there's Ken's girlfriend, Peggy, being held hostage a few blocks away on the 2nd floor next to Guido's grocery, guarded by 2 thugs. There's also the point that the thugs hold employees hostage at gunpoint. And then lastly, the owl is a mutant with psionic gliding, augmented by his attire and armed with steel talons. So these are just the first things that stick out to me in terms of how I'm going to, the things that are going to be important to translate, right? So I obviously don't need to worry about locations like the areas when the heroes are close, the thugs are going to switch to punching or whatever. That's just something I do in the scene, right? I wrote down Kishmal and Minute Bank because it's essentially the Minute Bank is in Kishmal, and so is there something I want to do with scene distinctions there? The 7 thugs are obviously important. That almost screams mob, and the owl is, even reading his thing, I didn't feel like he was a major GMC or anything. I made him as a minor GMC. And the thugs also, I think in actuality, the thugs as a mob are more formidable than the owl. So I think they'd probably boost each other, kind of. The Savage Land mutates, when like a lot of times when I play them, I like to have them just contribute dice to each other. And then obviously the important thing about Ken Michaels being there and his girlfriend Peggy, who's being held hostage. And I feel like that whole section, we're not necessarily going to cover it in what we're doing here, but I feel like that could be another scene, or almost will be or should be another scene afterwards, in which case you could do your own mob for the thugs that are there, or however you want to do it. If we were doing Cortex Prime, this whole thing is ripe for timed tests about the hacking and about the girlfriend, and I think you could do some really cool things there. I think you could probably use the Doom pool and maybe make crisis pools, a crisis pool about the hostages on the bank, and eliminating that crisis pool would mean that you freed the hostages. So you've got the crisis pool for the hostages, but you've also got the mob or the crisis pool for the. I think you can do a lot of really cool things, is what I'm saying, with Cortex Prime, with some of the additional layers that it brings. But even with just Marvel Heroic, it's very doable. So those are my notes. And then let's see if I can find the screen. All right, so here's what I came up with for a data file, and for 2 data files. I would have the owl. Certainly he has strength with a team, so that was his D8. Solo was D6. Buddy would be D4, right? Because the minor GMCs only have that 4, 6, and 8 for their affiliations. Then I only gave him 2 distinctions because it just kind of I really was kind of not interested in a third distinction, as silly as that sounds. It just wasn't something that struck me. I feel like you'd get a lot of mileage out of these two: professional criminal mastermind and ruthless and successful financial wizard. And both of those are lifted directly from the description in the book. Then Flight D6 and Claws D8, but with the SFX for takeoff, which is where you can spend a Doom die to step up or double flight for a turn. So if he is making use of the gliding, then perhaps in a, fleeing the scene, right? Then he can actually step up or double that flight die. And then, of course, the mutant limit. 3 specialties: combat expert, less because he definitely is a combat expert, and more because I just like to have that on my villains now, I think, because it just adds that extra dice that extra die into the pool. If you're a villain, on some level, he's got claws on his hands, so he is somewhat practiced in combat, so I didn't feel like that was a terrible thing to have. And then business expert and crime expert. For the thugs, we have 3 D8s for team affiliation. This is a mob. I gave them 2 distinctions: skilled predators and obedient prey. And both of those can be hindered. And I felt like that would be kind of a fun, you're kind of tongue-in-cheek when you're playing the old Marvel games, right? The guy's last name is Owlsley, and he's the owl, of course, right? So with skilled predators and obedient prey, I feel like that gives enough wiggle room for what they'll be doing, either fleeing or following the orders of the owl or something like that, or attacking and doing what they do. Combat expert specialty for D8, I gave them 2 things: durability and weapons, both at D6, but I gave them the focus SFX, which is where you can combine and step up. So you can combine so you have 3 D8s for your team. You can combine 2 of them into a D10. So in other words, they can hit a little bit harder if they're willing to sacrifice dice, which kind of plays into that idea of the owl is probably not directly confronting the heroes, but he's probably contributing a die to the thugs to kind of direct them around, right? So then that adds more dice to be focused up. 2 scene distinctions: crowded and bank security, because it is a bank, and so maybe they can make use of that or something. The heroes can make use of that, or the villains. And then I had the note that the rescue of Peggy, I think in terms of Marvel Heroic, there are different ways you could set it up. But I think the most straightforward way would just be that as the GM, as the watcher, you'd be bearing in mind that your Doom pool is going to be relevant in the next scene, and it's going to carry over. So the rescue of Peggy, which would be the next scene, would be against the Doom pool, more of a pass-fail kind of a situation. But if you wanted to do data files for the thugs that are there and a whole new scene, distinctions and everything, then that's totally doable. But if you were just looking at what's being given to us and you were just wanting to run it as one sort of one-shot scene without getting too complicated, I think you could just tack on at the end a roll against the Doom pool, or at some point, it doesn't say that the owl picks up a phone, but presumably he could do that. Then you could have them roll against the Doom pool, and if they fail, then disastrous things happen, or they have to make a choice or something like that, right? So that's what I came up with. Let me swap back over here. Oh, good, my camera's still working. Sometimes my camera shuts off, and I don't get it. So that's kind of the story, the short version of, or not short version, but like a short clip of how I kind of go through that process. But as I've done with the random generation stuff, there are times where I'll read and I'll take my notes, and then it'll be a day or 2 or 3, and I'm just thinking over how I want to represent things, what things I want to focus on, what things I don't want to focus on. So when I'm working from Marvel superheroes and translating out of that into Marvel Heroic or into Cortex Prime, the sort of first layer is what things don't I care about. So I don't care about karma, the points, but I do care about like what the emphasis of the scene is, what my characters should be or the heroes should be doing. I don't care about locations in terms of areas or anything like that, but I do care about scene distinctions, so I want to be paying attention for those kinds of details. I don't care about the specific number, in this case, of thugs, or specifics about the remarkable intensity of the claws or that owl has, or the slashing damage they do, because those things don't really translate. They're kind of in the realm of SFX, if anything. But I'm more interested in for instance, the distinctions for the owl of being a criminal mastermind. So that's important, right? That comes off the page. And the more you go through this, the more you do this sort of thing, the easier it becomes. You just kind of know what you're looking for, how things are worded. And the same is true when it's, this was for Marvel Heroic, but the same is true for Cortex Prime. You just have a little bit more things you could introduce. Now, if I was doing this for Froggy in that sort of, what did I call it? Did I call it Marvel Heroic Plus? The augmented Marvel Heroic that introduced some Cortex Prime things, I would probably do timed tests, at least one, maybe even a second one for Peggy, but at least one that would be happening kind of there in the bank. But I actually don't know that I would do that right away. I think I would have the thugs and have that kind of happening, and then introduce a timed test, and then have players make the choice about fighting the thugs or trying to pass the time test. And I would give them enough rounds that it wouldn't be a total bowl over. But I would do something like that to make them choose, because I think a lot of what's happening in the scene, you have hostages on the scene, you have hostage elsewhere, you have someone who's being coerced. There's a lot of pressure for time and making quick decisions, and I think that that's what I'd want to emphasize to my players, and so I need to kind of translate that into Cortex. How am I going to make them feel pressured? How am I going to make them... I might even start with a higher doom pool. Usually you start with, 2d6? I'd probably start with 2d8, simply because in this context, there's a lot of hostages, and there's a lot that could go wrong, which would mean bad publicity. And one of the things that you care about in Marvel Superheroic in Marvel Superheroes is reputation, because you've got that karma. Bad news coverage is a big deal, especially if you're playing original characters who can't bank on reputation in the past, which is something that I would like to model, or at least emulate in some fashion, or emphasize in some fashion to my players. Okay, it's been about 15 minutes, a little over 15 minutes. I think we did it. I think my microphone worked the whole time. I think my camera worked the whole time. And if you have any comments, questions, thoughts, observations, suggestions, please leave them in the comments. Thanks so much for watching. If you have things that you would like to see another time, jot it down there too, and I'll try to do a video covering it as well if you have specific questions. A lot has changed in the Cortex world in the last couple of weeks, and it's a fun place to be, and it's never a dull moment. So if you haven't joined the Discord, I encourage you to do so. It's a great community, new people joining all the time, but now I'm rambling. So again, thank you so much for watching. Excelsior.